Welcome, everybody. I am going to start and let folks trickle in because we are recording this webinar. And I'll mention this by way of a little bit of housekeeping at the end. We're recording this webinar, but it will be shared only with a closed group of invitees who registered for my informational webinar with AAPI earlier this year in April. Respectful of everyone's time, especially those of you who might be joining us live from the East Coast of the United States. I am Carolyn Lee, principal and founder of Carolyn Lee Pllc, which is a U.S. investment immigration dedicated law firm based in Ithaca, New York, the proud home of Cornell University. For this webinar, I'm really honored and pleased to be joined by my good friends and clients and regional center operators of Birch Capital, Bruce Rischuti and Ben Cummings. So when I give presentations, as I do as a EB-5 immigration attorney, going through the basics of the EB-5 immigration process for all sorts of audiences around the world and here in the United States, I often get questions from interested investors about doing regional center due diligence. It's really, I would say, at every single consultation or meeting or presentation I have, there are a number of questions about, well, how do I find a regional center project? And as immigration attorney, we cannot, the ways in which we can help are limited to the immigration due diligence, but not the larger due diligence of, what is a regional center offering by way of the project. And so those are conversations that the investors will have to have with the regional center directly. And so to get a general sense of how that conversation would go and the key questions that you might ask of a regional center in the course of your due diligence, we have the experts who can speak to that, who are long-standing and very successful regional center operators right here joining us today. Now, this is informational only, very important to say, and I have a slide just dedicated to that particular aspect of all of this. This is informational. This is not any sort of solicitation or a sale event of any kind. Both Birch and I feel that it is, it's important to get high quality, accurate information about the EB-5 program and what the investors can expect. And that's really what this presentation is about. So with that, let me share with you a presentation I have prepared for this session. And I will do that here. Terrific. I think that's sharing. I'll just get out a full screen here. So this presentation is called EB-5 and Indian Physicians, a Natural, because it really is a natural thing, I think, for physicians, Indian physicians practicing in the US to be thinking about EB-5 and to know about EB-5, to have good information about EB-5 if they are considering long-term residency in the United States. Why? Because the traditional route that I'm very, very familiar with, having represented many physicians and hospitals and private practices in a prior life as an immigration lawyer, I know that the traditional H-1B, J-1 waiver to H-1B to EB-2 based I-140 labor cert green card is very unappealing right now, unfortunately, and it just speaks to our larger problem of a very outdated immigration system, and where you are looking at a decades-long, and some have estimated a century-long backlog in the EB-2 category for Indians. So you have to be thinking about EB-5. Many of you I know from my own clients have children, have US citizen children. So you're sort of captive here, and you may, hopefully you are very happy in the United States. And so thinking about viable long-term US residency options are absolutely what you should be thinking about. And so EB-5 is just a natural kind of quiver or an arrow in your quiver as you think about these US immigration options, okay? All right, so here's the disclaimer. This is not advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. This is informational, and to the extent that this is informational to share who we are or who I am with you, it is promotional as well. When we talk about timeframes here, they're very, as you know, being exposed and working with US immigration, they fluctuate and they're subject to many, many variables. And we can also deem this attorney advertising to boot. So we can check all of our disclaimer boxes here. So we're going to try to touch really quickly because I want to give us time to introduce and talk about Birch Capital's experience as a regional center, both under the old law and under the EB-5 Reform and Integrity Act of 2022, or the RIA, which we'll touch on in this part of it as well. So I'll talk about our firm, I'll talk about the RIA, I'll talk about the EB-5 process, which Ben, Bruce, and I, the three of us, will give more color on as we three talk together after this hopefully brief part of more formal part of the gathering. And then we'll do a comparison with EB-2 and the EB-5 process as well. Okay, oops. So about myself, 17 years of EB-5 leadership, very lucky that I've been recognized for my scholarship and for advocacy in this area for a very long time. And I've served as 6-term chair, co-chair, vice chair of the American Immigration Lawyers EB-5 Committee. I serve as Legislative Counsel to Invest in the USA, IIUSA, which is the EB-5 Trade Association. And I currently serve as IIUSA's co-chair of the Public Policy Committee, where we respond to USCIS's policy, and we try to be proactive as well, especially with the new law that's just recently been passed. It's a very critical time for us as advocates in EB-5. In terms of client representation on the project side, including my client, Birch Capital, I've helped clients raise over $2.5 billion in EB-5 capital alone, stacked with other domestic capital in US development projects, and thousands of investors represented directly or under my supervision in the course of my long and very fortunate career. Phew, got that under our belts. Okay, so EB-5 Reform and Integrity Act of 2022. Ben, Bruce, and I have been through this from the get-go, from before the law was the law, when we as advocates were trying to get this law passed, because we've suffered 9 months of lapse without an EB-5 Regional Center program before that. And I do see a question. Thank you. Thank you. Questions are very welcome. And we will get to your question after we go through this part of our talk. I always think it's interesting for people to get this context about where we are, just and getting a better sense of that with an understanding of where we've been. So we have this monumental new law that passed in 2022. But there's been a very long runway to that event. And it really started back in 2015 when we had a bill called S-1501 that would introduce very huge changes to the EB-5 Regional Center program. What we have today is somewhere between where we were before with the old program and what S-1501 proposed in 2015. And so this S-1501 bill was, it introduced these sort of alarming changes because they were so drastic from the old program. And this caused sort of a seizure within the EB-5 community and sort of this, embattled posture between EB-5 private sector, and within EB-5 private sector, there were disagreements, of course. And then members of Congress who wanted very much to reform the EB-5 program. And this sort of struggle led to short-term extensions from 2015 to 2022, during which time we also had that 9-month lapse I talked about. So in between, we've had these huge rushes of cases and investors rushing to file because they wanted to get ahead of the changes that might come, that S-1501 heralded, and we eventually had a lapse of the EB-5 Regional Center program. So what became very obvious was that this program was in need of change, and what we have now is that change, and that's brought the EB-5 program back. So what do we have in the Reform and Integrity Act of 2022, or the RIA or RIA? We have the EB-5 Regional Center program revived to 2027. We do have an increased investment amount from 500,000 to 800,000 in TEAs, targeted employment areas. It's 1.05 million if the investment is not in a TEA. We have narrowed TEA definitions to qualify at the lower investment level. This was very important to interested members of Congress who wanted reform. So we have also rural set-asides. The two leading congressmen who pushed the RIA through are from rural states, from Iowa and Vermont. And so they wanted to make sure that rural projects traditionally underrepresented in EB-5 got a boost under their law. And indeed it does. We have a new set of categories, sub-visa categories, if you will, within EB-5 that we call set-asides. 32% of the overall annual visa allotment is devoted to TEAs, and 20% of the 32%, so the lion's share, go to rural cases. So that's a big advantage. High unemployment is still in there. High unemployment gets 10% of the special set-asides. And then this brand new category called infrastructure gets 2%. So that's 32% altogether. This new bill, though, it does not address the visa backlogs that were created as a result of those artificial surges in investor demand. It does address the protection of investors. So during those 9 months of lapse, what was the status of the EB-5 investors' cases that were pending? Now we know, because the new law grandfathers investors' cases. So even if there's program termination or lapse, their cases are protected. This is huge. Having been very, very involved with investor groups, including AIIA, led by many Indian investors, and having encouraged that group to get together and advocate for investors, this grandfathering is critical. This is a big win for that group and for investors generally. It also brings a very, very important new benefit that we did not have before, which is concurrent adjustment of status, which we'll talk about in just a minute, like now. So there are 3 steps. EB-2 has 2 steps. EB-5 has 3 steps of the immigration process. We file the I-526E, which is like the I-140. And after the I-526E is approved before RIA was the only time we would have been able to file an adjustment of status or consular process for an immigrant visa. Now we have concurrent filing and 526Es and adjustment of status applications for investors who are in the United States, like physicians in H-1B, can file the 2 steps concurrently, which you couldn't unless you had a very early priority date if you were applying for a green card in the EB-2 category. Step 3, now this is what you don't have in the EB-2 category that we do have as an additional step in EB-5. So once an investor gets the green card, it is conditional. It's not a permanent unconditional green card. It's conditional, and it's initially valid for only 2 years when that adjustment is approved. At the end of the 2 years, the investor has to file a third filing called the IA-29 to remove the conditions where the investor shows, look, I kept the investment in and I created all of the jobs. Okay. This might be a little bit too technical, but I'm going to go through it really, really, really quickly because I think, and everyone will get a PowerPoint who registered for the API event as well. And certainly those who are here tonight and who registered for our event tonight. This is the timeline because every investor thinking about investing in EB-5, of course, you will want to know, well, how long is this process? It's much, much shorter than the EB-2, but that said, you still will want to know, what can I expect? What can my family expect? And it's laid out right here. So the 526 petition is going to take about 3 years. Now that can change. Like I said at the very beginning, all time frames are subject to change. We know this, but let's say it'll take about 3 years. That's about the current processing time right now. Now, you would file the adjustment of status though concurrently because everybody is eligible, because it's current, because all of the set aside categories are current, which is very unusual in the employment-based immigration system, particularly for Indian professionals, where you have decades of backlog in every single other category, including not decades, but there's a backlog for Indian investors in EB-5 who invested pre-RIA. We're going to look at that in just a moment, but right now there is no backlog. Everything is current in the set-asides. That's not going to last. That is for sure. And so there is a bit of urgency here, and not an urgency. I don't like to talk about urgency of filing like, like, please, like, you got to file this. And, there's a lot of that kind of promotional thing happening. Not that, but there is a true benefit to filing and getting that early priority date, because there's a line forming. There's already a line in front of you, and there is for sure going to be a line behind you. So filing secures that priority date, which is your ticket in line. And the earlier your priority date, the better position you're in once we have a backlog in the set-asides, which I dare say is inevitable. So right now, all the EB-5 set-asides have visa availability, and that's going to change, but right now is good. And so at the time of you can concurrently file now. At the time of 526 approval, 3 years from now, let's say, the adjustment of status will be approved then if there is no backlog yet at that time in the set-aside. If there is, then there's a wait. There's a wait for the adjustment of status approval until the 526 is ultimately approved. Okay, that's that process right here. Once the adjustment of status is approved, then you start the third phase, which is the conditional residency period. And then you start the 2-year conditional residency period. At the end of the conditional residency period, the I-29 is filed to remove the conditions. And then once that's filed, right now it's taking about 4 years for a USCIS decision. Now, I encourage you to ask about, well, so what happens to my capital during this time? Am I, is my capital in the project until all of that, until the I-29 is approved 4 years after filing? I mean, how many years is that? It's a lot. So I encourage you to ask that question to Ben and Bruce from Birch Capital, either here this evening or later on as you watch this video, because they'll have a lot to say about that based on their experience managing investors right here in this process, having gone through the 829 approval here and return of capital, as well as having gone through redeployment successfully, I might add. Okay, so really quickly, step 1, 526E filing, that's step 1. You've got to invest and you've got to show job creation prospectively if the job creation hasn't yet happened. Source of funds, it's going to be from any number of sources that are lawful. That's the key. And for physicians, it's almost always going to be, based on my experience, based on employment, your earnings, your US earnings. So we're talking about W-2s and tax returns and bank statements. Sometimes there's some sort of an asset sale, like the sale of a house or asset mortgage, a loan secured by your assets. Very common also. In addition to that evidence that directly goes to the source of funds, we have tax returns that are part of the filing as well. Regional Center project, and again, I encourage you to ask questions related to this of Ben and Bruce, who are with us this evening. This is a critical part of this, is EB-5 is a job creation program. So it's the regional center who is responsible for producing this part of an EB-5 investor case. And the key part of that set of documentation that the regional center puts together relates to job creation. And it's comprised of the comprehensive business plan and an economic impact analysis. So this is, this measures the jobs, and this is the data that the measurements are based on. The set of documents produced by the regional center is also going to have a ton of disclosure and transactional documents. Usually there's an underlying loan, and so that's a transaction. That's all going to be in there. All of this is going to be in the regional center's I-956F, as in Frank, form. This is new. Under the old law, this project pre-filing, if you will, an exemplar application is what we call it, was optional. Birch Capital had a 924 exemplar approval, which was the 956F approval under the old law. And so they did that on their own. It wasn't mandatory, but they did that and got that in hand. And now under the new law, they and every other regional center mandatorily are filing 956Fs for their projects. Okay. I'm mentioning here also the direct EB-5, which I'm not going to talk a lot about this evening, where the evidence of the jobs, which has to be 10 full-time jobs for every investor. The evidence is a little bit different. It's very different, rather. And that evidence is about 10 individuals who are anticipated to be hired as a result of that investment. So rather than business plan and an economic impact analysis. Regional center investor grandfathering, very important. So this is one of the changes that I said the RIA brought that makes the program so much better and much more predictable from an investor's perspective. So thanks to the RIA, investor petitions are grandfathered. What does that mean? That means that investor cases receive continued immigration processing, even if, God forbid, again, the regional center program is not renewed. So that's a big question mark that is removed. So concurrent adjustment of status, not going to spend too much time. Those of you who are here and listening later, you know what adjustment of status is, and the EB-5 case can now be filed concurrently with the adjustment of status because number one, the RIA authorizes that now, first time for EB-5ers, and secondly, there's visa availability. There's no current backlog. Okay, so all the goodies that come with that, employment authorization document, EAD. So there's independent work authorization, not relying solely on your H-1B. There's travel permission, advanced parole. During COVID, particularly, this was a very important benefit because it was impossible, very difficult to get H-1B visas renewed, as some of you may know. Visa availability. So now, again, this is just the concept that's very important. There's visa availability now, which means it can happen. It can be filed, the adjustment. And this one point is, of course, very important. Doctors usually almost never have any issues here, but to qualify to file the adjustment of status, it's considered a special benefit. So you have to be eligible for that. Which means that you've never had a status violation or have any other ground of inadmissibility apply or any unauthorized work beyond 180 days. If the EB-5 investor, though, is not adjusting, they can still, this is still possible to file for an immigrant visa abroad. So processing for an immigrant visa in Mumbai. Traditional process, no impact there. That still happens. So after I-526 approval, then the DS-260 process would be initiated through the State Department and the National Visa Center. And then eventually there will be an interview at the end in Mumbai. And if it's successful, the visa is issued. And once you come in under that visa is when the 2 years of conditional residency would begin. Step 3, this is down the road. You're here in the US in conditional residency for 2 years, either because the adjustment's been approved or because you came in under the immigrant visa. When you land or when the adjustment of status is approved, that's day 1 of the 2 years in conditional residency. And at the end of it, we've got to file the 829 to remove the conditions. And then at the end of that is the unconditional green card and a path to US citizenship. I'm not going to go into comparison with EB-2 this evening. It's here in the PowerPoint. And you know the EB-2 process. It'll be here summarized. The visa bulletin, I hope everybody is familiar with. This is where we have the visa cutoff dates. This is, you know, where that that priority date and place in line really comes in, right? You know, this is where we are right now. We have current visa availability in the set-asides for EB-5. This is September. This is next month's visa bulletin, as compared with the cutoff dates in EB-1, which retrogressed crazy many years for India EB-1, and we've been at January 2011 for quite a while in EB-2 for India. For chart B, this is where the adjustment folks are at, right? You're here. So EB-1 is a lot better. And then EB-2 is still at May 2012. This is our pre-RIA investors. Their backlog is not as bad, but there is a backlog. And then we have availability in the set-asides right now. Skip that. Just a word about, understanding your position. And I know Birch feels exactly the same way. It's about what is the right fit for you and your family. As I love to say, by way of background, I mentioned that I started my immigration practice doing J1s and H1Bs and PERMs and I-140s for Indian physicians and hospitals and practices. That's just by happenstance how I happened to get into immigration before starting EB-5 in around 2004-5. My own family, my brother's an oncologist, my sister-in-law is a pulmonary specialist, my nephew just started Columbia Medical School, my son wants to be a doctor. So we have a lot of that in our personal backgrounds as well. So I know doctors work for their money. So this is not a light undertaking or decision. It's got to be the right decision. And I feel that given where we are in our fairly problematic, we need some fixes in our overall immigration system, particularly with our professionals in the EB-2. It's just EB-5 just has to be something that you are looking at and that you have good information on. And that is really what this is about. So please contact us if you have any questions. Birch, and we'll make sure that you'll certainly have contact information for Birch. I'm sorry, I realize as I have my own contact information that we don't have anything written this evening with Birch's contact information, but we will make sure that everybody who registered and who will get a copy of this video will have Birch's contact information as well. And if somebody can type it in, or I will even, during our talk tonight, we will. It's very easy. It's bruce@birchcapital.com and ben@birchcapital.com. And their wonderful website that really highlights all of their incredible experience in the EB-5 space is at birchcapital.com. We at CLP created this new EB-5 physicians community on WhatsApp. And you can scan that QR code, and you can also contact us, and we'll or connect via WhatsApp. And we're very excited about this. We'll push out announcements that are relevant to this specialized EB-5 community of doctors interested in EB-5 or who are EB-5 investors. I do feel like it is a very special community. For example, during COVID, my physician clients, they needed an expedited EAD because their H-1B bound them to particular facilities, and they felt the call to help people who are outside the approved boundaries of the H-1B. And we were successful. We got expedited EADs for those docs to work outside the scope of their H-1B. So things like that, I think that's a wonderful example of how special this community is. And so we'll push out information that we think is special to you guys there. All right, so hopefully that wasn't too boring. I'm going to stop sharing and then open the conversation up to Bruce and Ben. About Bruce and Ben. So we've known each other as they are my clients and friends, most importantly. And we've enjoyed that professional and relationship of friendship for, I think it's 10 years. It might be more now. We've done wonderful things in EB-5 that we're very, very proud of in terms of projects and how well investors and clients, I think, have been treated and fared with you guys. So formally, I want you to be here to answer questions and to talk about the regional center due diligence process. Everybody wants to know, how do I do this? How do I go about finding the good projects or regional centers? You know, this is daunting and new. How do I go about doing that? So I would love your wisdom on that. And in the course of that, to really tell us about Birch as an introduction and share that information. Who wants to go first? Oh, Ben, you're on. Both of you are on mute.
Both on mute. Okay. This is Bruce Raschuti. I'll go first. Carolyn, thank you very much for having us. I just learned a lot about EB-5 and the immigration process. Listen to your presentation.
Cool.
But as Carolyn said, we've been friends first for 10 plus years, I believe. Ben and I have been friends plus 30 plus years and have worked together on numerous opportunities for that entire period. I think we started together in 1992, Ben, if that rings a bell. So we have a lot of history here together between ourselves, between our colleagues, our other partners. We've been together for 30 plus years in all of our different opportunities in different companies. We got involved we're primarily real estate investors, analysts, real estate lawyers. We look at the real estate first and foremost as a project based for our regional center investors. I think we got into EB-5 about 12, 13 years ago. We only do one project at a time. So we can see it from start to finish for our investors, for our development sponsors. And it enables us to have sort of hands-on with our investors as well as with the sponsors in our project, so that we're not competing for investors or we're not competing for different projects. Plus, we're a boutique firm. We're not that large, and we're completely relationship based. So that is sort of how we operate things. And the main reason I think that we really like EB-5 from our traditional real estate investment opportunities is EB-5 and the regional center program, if it's done right, is really a win-win-win situation. Everyone is aligned in their interests. We're successful if the investor is successful. We're successful if our borrower or our real estate project is successful, and everybody's interests are aligned. And there's no competing interest in that structure. So I will sort of end my little chat here before I send it over to Ben, just to talk about a couple important things about regional centers. First thing I would mention is about the participants. And who is the regional center? Who are the regional center sponsors? And who are they aligned to? Are they aligned to the project or to the investor? The Birch Capital model is we represent the investors, and we have no equity or interest in any of our projects. We strictly serve as a lender to the project. So there's no conflict of interest. Some regional centers could be the regional center and the builder or the sponsor developer. So basically, what money is coming in for the project into one hat and just going to the other hat. So I think that's a big difference that I would advise investors to look at and what their comfort level is. The second thing I would look at, or very just similar to any other investment that you're going to make in real estate, your practice or what have you, project risk and exit strategy or exit risk. Those are obviously the two primary strategies and risk factors you're going to have to take into consideration for any investment, no different for EB-5. The third one that obviously isn't traditional would be the job creation risk. So I think that if you have a good understanding of where your risk tolerance is within those three primary categories, project, job creation, and exit strategy, your risk reward relationship and where the project that you're looking at or the regional center falls within that, I think you're going to be able to make some pretty good decisions. Birch Capital, I like to say that we are a credit-based EB-5 program. So we're more on the low reward, low risk category. We have 100% track record of returning capital. Our returns are very low, but our capital redemptions are very high. They're as high as they can be. We've repaid every investor 100% of their investment capital over the 13 years, which is not as common in this business as you would think it would be. Job creation, we usually run about 50 to 80 investors, jobs per investor. So we sort of click that button. Exit strategy is important to our investors, so it's important to us. You'll look at prospectuses where investors go into transactions where the developer could have an option to extend a loan or your investment period. This is typically in weaker projects where a developer might not have the money to repay the loan, might not have not able to refinance, could have problems, what have you. It could also be from the regional center point of view, whereby the general partner or of the loan of your limited partnership, their interests sometimes cannot be aligned with yours. And longer they're able to keep the money, the more fees, interest that they will collect, and in turn, have somewhat of a conflicted interest where they want the loan to go on, where you might want your money back. We have stronger projects whereby our last project we closed in Boston, we repaid investors who wanted to be repaid in 3.5 years when the loan came due. Our current project we also has options. The big difference is the options are towards the investor, meaning that at the end of the investment period, if you need to stay in for your immigration status or your immigration status changes and you want your money out, that's your choice, not the general partner of the limited partnership, not the borrower, your choice. And that's the way we structure things, more in line with our investors. I think if you keep those three things as your main points, and you can do your due diligence from the USCIS website of regional centers, and you can probably just do Google searches to see who's got project active. I'm sure there's quite a few websites. I'm not really quite sure how you would get all the information about projects, but there are advisors out there. There's plenty of website material I'm sure you can find, and we would always be happy to assist you as well. I'm sure Ben has something much more important and brilliant to say than that.
Well, thanks, Bruce, for that introduction. And first, let me just apologize for my voice. I picked up a virus on a trip to Rochester, New York this past weekend. So if any of you doctors can help me out, that would be great. But just to add a bit to what Bruce has been saying, yeah, all of these things are work that the regional center does, and it takes time, it takes money. It's not an easy process to be in the EB-5 regional center business. Besides having to meet immigration laws and regulations, you have to meet securities laws and regulations, and you have to find good real estate projects or other kinds of projects where you will create the jobs in the time that's required, and where the project will be successful so that you can get your money back, as Bruce has said at the end. So there are other risks that go along with choosing a project as well as choosing a regional center. Any real estate development has risk. Any real estate investment has risk. And that's where Bruce's background, my background are really important to us in the way that we look at things. You know, I'm a real estate lawyer by background in commercial real estate. Bruce is a finance and appraisal valuation businessman. That's how we got connected some 30 years ago in other lives. And so we've used those skills in EB-5 to evaluate good projects for our investors. We always want to be sure that we would not try and sell anything to anybody if we weren't happy that we would invest in it ourselves. We want to sleep well at night. So the risks that you have to look at in making an EB-5 investment, you know, are construction risks in uncertain economic times and uncertain political times. There are risks about where the revenue is going to come from. Is your revenue stream going to be one project, one restaurant, one apartment building, or is it going to be a multiple of revenue streams that are going to make the project successful and generate money for your exit strategy? You have to worry about where is the developer money coming from? Does the developer have other financing arranged? And how much of the developer's own money or equity is being invested in the project, which is usually a clue as to whether the developer has a strong sense of project success. Our track record, interestingly, at Birch Capital in EB-5 started out in the medical realm with our first building, which we assisted in financing at the University of Miami in Florida, a research building for the Miami Health District. And that was an extremely successful project. It was built for $107 million. It sold for $220 million, I believe is the number, Bruce, or close.
Somewhere around there.
And, you know, it has about one of the strongest tenants you can have when you have a university leasing that space and paying rent. And so that's the kind of project that we encourage investors to invest in, not only for EB-5 purposes, but for the security of the investment of your funds. So that's, you know, those are just a couple other things to consider. The one last thing I would just mention is, Bruce already said we have a 100% track record of returning investment capital to the investments, to the investors. We also, since 2010, have a 100% track record of getting the immigration visa approvals for our investors. We've never had a bad project, and we look very carefully at the project and at the quality of the developer that we are investing investor money in. So, you know, there's a long checklist. If you're interested in that, we'd be happy to provide it to you as well. In the future, as Carolyn said, we'll make available our contact information and you know, be happy to answer any specific questions that anyone may have.
We do have a couple of questions, and I have a question too, about, Bruce, you mentioned, you know, low risk, low return. I'm not a finance person, so I have a little, I have to kind of like walk through what does that mean? How does that work? So, and what's the opposite of that? High risk, high return. Why is high risk, high return, and why is low? And can you have high return and low risk? But let's get to our.
Well,
our
if you have high return and low risk, I want to know that investment.
Yeah. So,
That's
but
what
I want to know, like, why is it that low risk is low return? I mean, if you can just kind of break that down for us non-finance types, which
Sure.
includes our docs. All right. So we have a couple questions. I'm on an H4 EAD in Texas. Can I start my own clinic and apply for EB-5? Can I get a loan for clinic startup as part of investment for it? You can, yes, absolutely, get your own project in essence. This is what we would call that direct EB-5. This isn't where, a regional center like Birch would be involved, but what that would entail is setting up that clinic to be the job creator. You would have to show that that clinic is going to create 10 full-time US jobs for non family members. So it can't be like your spouse who's the H-1B, that person would not qualify. So 10 full-time US persons as employees. But yeah, that could work. If we apply for EB-5 now along with AOS and EB-5 is current, when do I get the EAD? Great question. Now or after? I love this question. You get it soon. So you file concurrently and you get the EAD within 3 to 4 months. Just this office. And so you get a combo card now. You may be familiar with this, you may not be, because if you've never filed an adjustment, you won't know. But when you file the adjustment concurrently, a couple of years ago, USCIS, a few years ago, began issuing what we call combo cards, which are the EAD, the employment authorization document, and the travel document together. Recently, just a couple of years ago, the service uncoupled those. And I love the reasoning. It was very well-meaning. I was there when they announced it. Very well-meaning. They said, especially during COVID, it's important for people to be able to work. So we're going to prioritize the ADs and, the advanced paroles, the travel permits, not so important. Well, kind of a disaster because the international community need to travel. Folks need to visit their family. They need to travel for business. And it was a real problem, including many of our clients who needed to leave, who had their EADs in 3 to 4 months, but they couldn't travel. H-1Bs are different. You guys are in a different category. You can actually leave before you get that travel permit. If you have an H-1B visa and come back in it, you're fine. But if you're an F, if you have another status, if you leave before you get that advanced parole, it's a huge problem. Just today, our office received combo cards. So USCIS is doing it again, is coming back to the combo cards, which in the clients that we got the combo cards for today, 3 months, I think. Now, I don't think again, timeframes, you can't count on that, but that's pretty quick. Let's say 4 months for an EAD. So it's really good. Let me see if there's another question before we get, how much investment do we need for direct EB-5? And can we get a loan as part of that investment? Yes, you can use a loan, just as you can for a regional center investment as well. So if I understand your question correctly, and if I don't, feel free to ask more. If you mean by get a loan like mortgaging your home or getting a home equity line of credit, very common. And you would get a bank loan and you use that bank loan, whether it's the whole amount, the 800,000, or part of it, a bank loan for 500,000 and your earned income for 400,000 or 300,000, that works. So yes, you can use a loan for EB-5 investment if that's what you mean. How much investment do we need? Yes, Bruce.
Oh, I was just going to add about the direct EB-5 investment, just so the question is clear. or the answer is clear. I think I understand that you'd have to create 10 jobs for each $800,000 investment.
Yes,
So if
correct.
so say 2.4 million, if you needed 2.4 million of your loan for a clinic or your startup, you'd have to create 30 jobs.
If there were, it's per investor. So if a clinic needed 2.4 million, that investor would need to put in his 800,000 and raise other money, but it would only need 10 jobs unless he had other investors in there.
But you still need, if you have the EB-5 capital, you would, if 2.4 million, would you need 30 jobs or still just 10 jobs?
No, it's per investor.
Okay, not by the amount.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, that's
So that's actually, you know, that would be a great, yeah, that's a great scenario where if you were successful in raising that 2.5, but you only put in 800,000, that 2.5 is, you know, is like more assured of creating 10 jobs than just 800,000, and you get to take it all.
That's definitely an advantage over the regional center program then.
If in a situation like that.
Yep.
It is not, I must say, it's not easy to create the 10 full-time jobs. So yeah, but if you can, you know, like a physician's practice, it could, you know, because you need you need a receptionist, LPNs, you know, maybe 2 or 3 depending on the size of the practice. You're going to have at least 1 doctor, maybe more. So it could, but it isn't, you know, it isn't easy. And then the business plan is very specific about detailing the positions. So it can be done. Yeah. Can we get back to the questions about the question that I had about the low risk and low return versus high risk and high return? Because I think you know, it's a lot of money. It's 800,000. And I think people are thinking, wow. So, and again, doctors work for their money. So, you know, I'm going to be separated from this for a while. And then there's all the whole at-risk requirement and everything. So what do you say to people who are like, well, why can't, you know, why can't I have my cake and eat it too? Why can't I have a safe thing protecting my principal and, you know, have a high, you know, just a nice return?
Well, I think it's general, you know, investment strategy is no different in EB-5 than in any other asset class.
Okay.
If you're going to invest in a real estate traditionally and not in EB-5, it's very much the same methodology that we're going to underwrite. And, you know, and a developer is using EB-5 along with other capital stack. You know, traditional banks, life companies, mortgage REITs, what have you. So you're going to have to be somewhat, you know, consistent with other rates of return. But I think the best way to look at this is if you were going to loan money to build a Walmart distribution center, or you were going to lend money at the investment capital to build a suburban office building in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, you know, which one do you think carries more risk? Leasing to Walmart, 1 tenant, 1 lease for 20 years, or trying to get tenants in an office building in Alabama?
Oh, right. Okay.
So it sort of goes by, you know, to what our senators in the EB-5 program in Iowa and in Vermont, the rural project.
But why wouldn't, so, okay, so I get that part. So, you know, yes. So leasing to one major tenant like Walmart for 20 years, that's safer. But then why wouldn't that project give a higher return?
The higher return, the higher return would go to the Alabama office building. You're taking more risk.
But you know, the question is, why is it that the lower risk projects or any kind of investment yield less? I mean, is there some sort of inherent relationship, or, why couldn't somebody invest in a project like that, Walmart for 20 years? Why, what is it? What is the mechanism that's sort of disallowing a higher return in that scenario?
Well, the complicated answer is that rates of return are based on spreads to treasuries. It was typically LIBOR. Now it's a new interbank rate. But your primary lenders are going to quote a rate based on a risk spread to some sort of constant.
Mm-hmm.
So any regional center is going to be competing with primary lenders or whoever's in the capital stack.
Mm-hmm.
If that's mezzanine debt, if that's equity, if that's first mortgage, second mortgage. So you're going to be competing with other forms of capital.
Right.
So you're not going to be able to charge whatever you want. We can't walk into
right. You have to be lower than those other forms of capital.
Typically, you have to be lower.
Yeah.
At Birch Capital, sometimes we're not lower, but that's another reason why we're not lower.
But then why does it have to be like, let's say those other lenders are lending to the developer at 4%. So you could, or let's say they're lending at 8%. I'm just making this up. And then so to be under 8%, you can go as high as 7% and be lower. So what is preventing a regional center from, I guess, okay, so yeah, so how would you, so let's say, yes.
Typically it's going to be lower. Because of the execution risk.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we typically find in the marketplace is if you're doing some sort of preferred debt at 8% and the Blackstones of the world will give 8 to 10%.
Mm-hmm.
Traditionally, a regional center is going to be lower than that because they're going to have execution risk. It's called a best efforts raise. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And most times an EB-5 regional center just doesn't have $10 million sitting in the bank.
So the developer is not going to be willing to pay more where there is that kind of execution risk.
Exactly right.
So, okay. Gotcha.
Exactly right.
So that's one thing. So that's
typically, and typically the regional center money it's always in a different place in the capital stack. And it's another thing that we sort of advise investors to look at is, what's your collateral in the project and where does your money fit in the capital stack? We also advise investors, it's kind of a crazy question to ask, but it's one that we think is important. Does the project need EB-5 money?
Yes, right. That's where I was just going right now is.
Yeah, and that's something that we get very nervous about.
Right? Because if you
need it, yeah.
That's what I understand is if you need it, you're willing to pay more to get it. And that's how you can promise or, have a deal where you're saying it's going to have a higher rate of return.
Yep. And typically,
I think that is very
and the projects that we've done, all three, is none of our developers have needed EB-5 money.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
They've used it as a way to lower their true cost of capital. Mm-hmm. That was basically our first two projects. Trade Point's a little different. They like EB-5 money because it comes with no restrictions.
Right, because the banks are going to put all kinds of
restrictions. The bank money goes to one building. Our money goes to Trade Point, and all they have to produce to us is that it went for capital expenditures. So if they want to build a road, if they want to do lighting, if they want to put more rail track, they can do what they want, and that's why it's very advantageous for them. The University of Miami's developer, they used it to reduce their capital cost. So did our Pierce Boston So that's always what we like to ask is if the developer needs your money, and does that money sit in escrow until they raise a minimum amount before they can release it? And you're taking the investors taking, execution risk for their 526. If the money's sitting in escrow, then the project has some hiccups and the project never gets done, it gets delayed, what have you. So that's another big question we always ask is, how long is your money going to sit in escrow if it does sit in escrow? We've had projects in the past that money have sat in escrow and then been released. Our Trade Point project, it sits in escrow during your process, Carolyn, and then it's immediately released to the project once the 526 is completed. The money never touches Birch's hands. It goes from escrow directly to Trade Point to start earning interest, to start counting job creation, start working for the investor, as well as, ties your 526. So there's no execution risk to the investor with regard to the project. So the way that we've structured all of our transactions is to reduce risk almost on a line item by line item. Ben mentioned a lot of the project risks, reducing occupancy risk, reducing construction risk, reducing equity risk, financing, escrow, then from the immigration standpoint, obviously reducing job creation risk. Our option period takes into account redeployment, so that we reduce investor term risk. We don't want investors being tied to our projects for a lifetime, or for 100 years, for whatever the poor Indian doctors have to wait. We want them to be able to exit when it's best for them. It's a 5-year loan term, which is standard in the industry, but at the end of that 5 years, the investors should have some capabilities to exit at their needs. And we're doing that right now with investors in our Pierce project, as well as our Trade Point project, where they're coming up on an option period at the end of January 24, and we send them out a solicitation, and we just ask them pretty much a simple question. Do you need additional time for your immigration status? If you do, check yes, and you stay in the deal for another year or so. And if you don't, and you want your money back, check no. And February 2nd or 3rd, we're going to send those investors who check no their money back.
And importantly, I've got to tell you this is your immigration counsel. It's not, it's that the investors do not have, they don't have the right to tell you, all right, so I want my cap. Now, if that's one thing, if they withdraw from their immigration, that's one thing. That's what
I'm referring to.
Oh, yes. Okay. Just
these are some of some investors who have been in for quite a long period. And actually, we also have some investors who are withdrawing because they got their visas other ways, either through employment. We have
the I-140.
We have a Dutch investor who got married.
Yeah, right.
And so he withdrew his EB-5 application, and
we don't have time to go into this right at this call, but I would love to. Many EB-2 Indian physicians may ask, I know because my own clients have had this question. Let's say they get their priority date is reached on their I-140 because it was filed so long ago. And so they have the opportunity to get their green card based on that I-140, which is superior to an EB-5 green card because it's not conditional, right? So what about those investors who have and almost all of them will be pursuing the I-140, the traditional way of getting the green card through employment-based, that's got the 100-year wait. They will be doing that alongside the EB-5. So what if by miracle, and we've had these weird surges of advancements in priority dates in these other categories. What if they have the opportunity to get the green card that way? What is the process that, that you would put in place for them? Again, the investors can never have capital that's not at risk. That's kind of the, the thing here. But would they have options?
Yes, I think we would view it as we wouldn't be able to change our offering docs, obviously, on a one-off basis. That's part of the securities issues that Ben's been talking about. But the current loan term for our current transaction goes through calendar year end of 27. So any investor would be stuck, if you will, for the next 4 years and change till the end of 27. And at that point, there's 3 one-year options in place currently, going out obviously through 2030, whereby investors have the opportunity with 6 months notice to say in or out. But that 6-month notice is Trade Point's really 6-month notice. It's a little complicated. So Trade Point has time to come up with the money that they have to redeem. So you're really in for another 18 months from when you have to give the notice. But it's still substantially, I think, better flexibility than you're seeing out there, with other folks. And, we hear the horror stories at conferences where, it was in the Wall Street Journal not too long ago about Hudson Yards, where some people got stuck because, the mega developer couldn't repay the capital and the funds weren't there, and just gets churned and churned and churned. And, those aren't the projects that we like.
This is a good question. Good question. All right, so the next one, Birch Capital successors. How many EB-5s did you do so far? Fair question.
Yep, we're our third project. And as I indicated, we only do one project at a time from start to finish. So that's in any given project, there's a little bit of overlap when you stop raising investors, but any given project is, between 5 and 7 years. So there is a little bit of overlap, but you're not competing for investors at any one time with a project. So we were fully sold out in Miami while we were getting going on Boston. Then we were fully sold out in Boston when we started raising money for Trade Point. So, we've had, hundreds of investors who've been through the process, that have all received 100% of their capital back, either through, that's always through the project, but in accordance with getting their green card or not getting a green card. So that we have had Chinese investors, if you will, that have dropped out due to the wait, and they decided they didn't want to come to the U.S. We had a New Zealand investor who decided that coming wasn't in their best interest and dropped out. But they all received 100% of their funds back.
That's I'm sure very welcome news or information to have.
I would feel terrible if at the end of, the money that we're sending back, we're providing back is at the 500,000 limit. And, we're going to return $9 million to investors who are redeeming at the end of January. So that's 18 investors. And I wouldn't be able to sleep at night if we weren't giving them all their money back. We wouldn't have been successful. That's just plain as day. We're real estate investment professionals. If we weren't repaying our investors back, we failed. So that's very important to us.
Yeah, I mean, at the risk of sounding like, I don't know, this is not, I don't want to make it sound, too, I don't know, whatever. But I do think it's impressive that it seems to be what makes you guys relatable, and what I think certain investors are drawn to is you're not glitzy. But it's, I think, and I didn't appreciate this when I first met you guys, and when you said from the get-go, you guys are about relationships. And I was like, oh, that's homey. But now that I've been with you guys for about a decade, I see why that's important, because when you know the people you're dealing with, you know the people you're dealing with. And when you only deal with people you have confidence in, and they're the people you know, it turns out that that has a pretty good result.
Yeah.
Now I get it.
Yeah, but I should clarify, sort of my last comment a little bit, that to keep apples and oranges and everything together. The majority of projects that you're probably going to be looking at, investors are going to be looking at, are probably some sort of debt, which is a fixed income loan structure, as differing from an equity structure, so that you have a fixed rate of return, and you have a fixed coupon rate of return, and then you have your return of capital. Our projects, and probably I haven't seen too many EB-5 projects that are equity based that have an upside. A lot of them are preferred equity with a preferred return, but still limited, if maybe no upside. Our projects are all fixed bases, so there's no upside. So which really is what it's all about when I say, since there's no opportunity for gain on the equity side of your investment other than the interest, that's why we would feel so terrible if, say, we were returning $400,000 or $700,000 because the project wasn't successful, because there was no opportunity to make $900,000. So that's why it's important for 100% redemption.
I'm gonna probably have to ask you for a sidebar explanation of that again, but I fear asking you to break it down even further, because despite my promise to you both when I said, oh, this will be under an hour, I'm looking at the clock and we are clocking in at 1 hour and 22 minutes right now. We did answer the questions, all of the questions that we did get. Please ask. Feel free to ask. I'm going to put in the chat box right now. Host and panelists, everyone. I'm going to put Bruce's email address at bruce@birchcapital.com, and Ben's email, which is ben@birchcapital.com, and of course their website, which is birchcapital.com. I told you guys that there was another Birch Capital wannabe.
Yeah, there's a few, but there's no.
There's a few. Okay, so yeah, it's this.
But we're the real deal.
They're the real deal, and don't get confused. Their colors are orange, right? Isn't that there's orange?
No, Trade Point's colors are orange.
Okay, that's what's orange. Yeah, you'll know when you see bright orange. And everybody will get contact details as well, and a copy of this recording. So thank you everybody for joining and for viewing whenever and wherever. And thank you, Bruce and Ben. We'll do this again.
Thank you.
But maybe not at 9 p.m. our time.
It's fine.
Feel better, Ben.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Good night.
Good night.